Did you know that according to Christian mythology, Jesus of Nazareth is trans?
Did you know that none of that is true at all?
Did you know that some Bible scholars think it might be true?
Alright, it may surprise you, but some New Testament scholars actually argue that within the biblical text there is reason to understand Jesus as trans, or as transcending the gender binary. You see, in the recently published book, Transbiblical, there is a chapter written by Dr. Katy E. Valentine, titled Putting the Trans in Transfiguration in Mark 9, 1-9. This chapter argues that there are actually multiple reasons to consider Jesus' transfiguration as a trans story. You see, the Greek text of Mark suggests that the transfiguration of Jesus actually involved a bodily transformation. Mark 9, 2-3 reads like this: Jesus took Peter and James and John, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured in front of them, and his clothes became exceedingly shining white, such that no one on earth could ever bleach them. The Greek verb translated transfigured is metamorphosis. And BDAG notes that this term means to change in a manner visible to others. Additionally, the text explicitly says that Jesus was literally transfigured in front of them. BDAG notes that when emprosthen is followed by a genitive, it indicates a more immediate presence in front of the object. In other words, Peter, James, and John are not just having some conceptual revelation here. They're seeing Jesus' body physically transform right before their very eyes. And interpreters for a long time have just assumed that Jesus' transfiguration has nothing to do with gender. But this kind of bodily transformation, or literally metamorphosis, can include gender transformation. Dr. Valentine's research argues that the transfiguration in Mark 9, 1-9 is situated firmly within the expansive framework of metamorphosis stories in the ancient world, including corporeal gender transformations. You see, Jesus' transfiguration, or metamorphosis, looks very similar to other metamorphosis stories in the ancient world that include gender transformation. In fact, metamorphosis is the noun form of metamorphao, the verb translated transfigure in Mark 9:2. And metamorphosis is literally the title of multiple Greek and Latin works that include metamorphosis stories with gender transformation. Let's look at one of these metamorphosis stories. In Ovid's metamorphosis story, a person named Iphis is transformed into a man by a god so that he can marry the woman he loves, Ianthe. Let me give you the cliff notes of this story. In this story, Iphis is born a female, but they're raised as a boy because their father said that they would kill any child that wasn't a boy born to him. And so the mother hid Iphis' gender from the father and raised this person as a boy their entire life. And then later in life, whenever they fell in love with a woman, they went to the god Isis to pray that their gender would be transformed so that they could actually marry this person that they loved, Ianthe. I think I got everything that you need to understand this. In the climax of the story, Iphis goes to the god Isis to have their gender transformed. It reads like this: The goddess seemed to move, nay, moved her altar. The doors of the temple shook. Her moon-shaped horns shot forth gleams of light, and the sistrums rattled noisily. In fact, you who but lately were a girl are now a boy. You see, stories about metamorphosis in the ancient world can include gender transformations, and this is by no means the only story that does this in Greek or in Latin. This then reveals that there is a range of ways to understand Jesus' transfiguration, or Jesus' metamorphosis, and one of the possibilities could actually include gender transformation. Now, it's important to note here that Mark 9 doesn't explicitly say that Jesus' gender changes like it does in Ovid's metamorphosis whenever Iphis' gender literally changes. In fact, throughout this text, Jesus is called the beloved son, and he/him pronouns are used to describe Jesus throughout the story. However, there are multiple reasons within the text that Dr. Valentine points to that suggest that Jesus' transfiguration is actually about gender transformation too. You see, both Jesus' transfiguration and Iphis' transformation include shining lights. In the story of Iphis, when the gender transformation happens, the altar shot forth gleams of light. Similarly, when Jesus is transfigured, the robe of Jesus becomes dazzling white, or literally shining white. Mark in Greek even has an added adverb, exceedingly, which is left out in some modern English translations. Dr. Valentine writes, "The pattern is clear. Corporeal metamorphoses often include shining, flashing, brightness, and lights, and they sometimes include gender transformation. Jesus' clothes follow this pattern as they shine, gleam, dazzle, firmly anchoring Jesus' divinity and signaling a potential gender transformation." Another reason Dr. Valentine argues that interpreters should include gender transformation in Jesus' transfiguration is that the text includes the genderqueer Moses in verse 4. Recent scholarship on Moses recognizes that Moses is presented as genderqueer or gender ambiguous in the Hebrew Bible and in the New Testament. For example, in Exodus 34, Moses' face shines and he puts a veil over his face. Veils were something that women wore in the ancient world. Paul even repeats this idea in 2 Corinthians 3:13. This is why Dr. Valentine states, "Through the veil, Moses becomes feminized or queer." Therefore, by associating the transfigured Jesus with the gender ambiguous Moses, the story further suggests that Jesus' gender is potentially being transformed or feminized. That being said, when you combine all these details, and Dr. Valentine actually covers more, Dr. Valentine concludes, is it possible to interpret the Transfiguration as a transgender experience? Undoubtedly, yes. You know, if we're honest with Mark 9 and the transfiguration of Jesus, we have to acknowledge that there are multiple reasons within this text to recognize this as a trans story. And thus, it's possible to understand Jesus as someone who transcends the gender binary. In Mark's transfiguration, Jesus transcends how the disciples understood Jesus, and perhaps how you have understood Jesus too. Now, you don't have to agree with everything Dr. Valentine argues about this passage, but it's not accurate to say,
"Nope, nothing about Jesus changing his gender in here."
In contrast to just outright rejecting the possibility that Jesus transcends the gender binary, I think we should always be willing to read the Bible in its ancient context, even when that context unsettles the things we thought we have been taught or told. So, why does this matter?
Why?
Well, it matters because Jesus is often understood as God incarnate, God in human form. In Philippians 2, Jesus is described as the form of God, or the morphe theou. Notice that this is the same root word for transfigure, metamorphothe. But if we limit Jesus to only being the form of God when Jesus is a man, then we limit who can reflect the divine image, and we neglect the rich interpretive potential of these sacred texts.
So we have this rich treasury of language in our scriptures that we neglect. And in our neglect, we make a lie the truth that we proclaim, that we are all the image of God. Male, female, non-binary, trans. It matters what language we use.
Indeed, it matters the language we use and how we understand that language. When we neglect the possibility that Jesus transcends the gender binary, we exclude those who don't fit the gender binary, and we imply that men are the only ones who can really reflect the image of God. But when we recognize that Jesus can transcend the gender binary, we realize that everyone, whether they be trans, non-binary, man, woman, whatever gender they identify as, everyone, no matter their gender, can reflect the image of God. And that's good news. Now, I can only cover a few details from Dr. Valentine's research in this book, so if you want to dig in deeper, definitely go check out this book. All right, thank you so much for watching. If you like this content, please, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe and hit the like button. And if you want to learn more about how the Holy Spirit is not confined to the gender binary, check out this video. Until next time, peace.